Parshas Vayeshev. This is the last year before the winter break, Yetzer Hashem. So the next year will be, Yetzer Hashem, Tuesday, Parshas Vayeshev, which is the beginning of January. And if you were interested, there are recordings from last year, I think, on the Parshas between now and then. So you can always have a little chazara if you want. I'll send you the links. If anyone wishes in future to sponsor it, please be in touch. With that out of the way, I want to focus this week on the story of Yosef in Mitzrayim. It might be a little bit of a different style share, because I feel there is a tremendous amount of chizuk that we can draw from the story of Yosef in Mitzrayim, and we are also going to show how it's relevant to Chanuka coming up, Yetzer Hashem, as well. So to start with, a very simple question: how did Yosef manage to overcome the tremendous challenge which he faced with Eshes Potiphar, the wife of Potiphar, the wife of his boss, who was trying to entice him into doing an Aveira? How was he able to overcome that? And then to explain how it's relevant to us in our life and how it becomes relevant to Chanuka as well. So we're all familiar with the storyline. The storyline: Yosef was sent by his brothers, was sold by his brothers, and he ended up in Mitzrayim. If you want to understand the depth of the whole to-do with why you have to sell him, again, that was last year's topic. Happy to send you the link. But this week we're just going to focus on the fact that he was sold and he ends up in Mitzrayim, and Yosef becomes working for a guy called Potiphar. And the Pasuk describes Lamates Beis Vayihi Ish Matzliach. He was a very successful guy, and Potiphar continued to promote him. The Pasuk says V'chol yeshloi nosam b'yodoi. Rashi says V'chol asher yeshloi. Anything he had, he gave over to Yosef. Yosef was his right-hand man. He was his chief of staff. He was second in command. But then, at this precise moment, after Yosef's doing so well, is where the trouble started, as the Pasuk Zayin tells us, after these things, Eshes Potiphar wants to do an Aveira with Yosef. And what was she attracted to? So the Mefarshim say he was beautiful. The Pasuk describes him as beautiful, so clearly he was attractive as being a handsome man. But it wasn't just his physical beauty, it was this tremendous hatzlacha that he had. He seems to be someone who was worthwhile being in the presence of because he was so successful. Not only that, but there was a spiritual, so to speak, slant to it as well. Rashi, the beginning of the Parsha, brings why is the Parsha of Yosef and Potiphar, Eshes Potiphar, next to the Parsha of, previously said in the Parsha, Yehuda and Tamar, where was another incident of Yehuda getting with Tamar. And Rashi says, just like that's L'Shem Shamayim, so too this was L'Shem Shamayim. What does it mean L'Shem Shamayim? Eshes Potiphar saw in astrology that she was supposed to have offspring coming from Yosef. She didn't quite know if it was her or future generations, but anyway, she saw him in her sights, and she thought she had to pursue her destiny. So you're talking about a woman who is swept off her feet by handsome Yosef from his looks, who is struck by Yosef's hatzlacha that seems to follow him everywhere, and finally thinks that in her mind she's pursuing her destiny. So you're talking about an incredibly powerful, ambitious, passionate pursuit on her part. In response to her intense efforts of trying to get him, the Pasuk tells us, Vayemo'in. Yosef refused. Now the word Vayemo'in is one word, but we know the trop is what's called a shalsheles. It's elongated. Chaim can give us a free session if you want, but it goes something like Vayemo'in. And you get a sense of that trop, that there was far more going on here than the Pasuk is just giving us. And the Midrashim, as you can imagine, are just abundant in their explanation and drawing out the exact goings-on that Eshes Potiphar engaged in to try and get Yosef. But we're going to focus on what the Yalkut Shimoni records here. She literally, as you will see some of this, she pulled every trick in the book and every power of persuasion possible to try and get Yosef over to her. And don't forget, when he's pushing back, he's not just pushing back over a woman who's a bit of a nuisance. It's the wife of his boss. And he's doing quite well in Mitzrayim right now. So, not really something you want to start up with or rock the boat. But he did. So, the Yalkut Shimoni says an example. He says, listen, my ancestors, meaning his grandfather, was chosen by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be a korban. Says Yosef HaTzadik to Eshes Potiphar, maybe I'm going to be chosen to be a korban, but when Hashem turns up, I'm going to be possible because of what I do with you. he says another argument. Hashem appeared to my father, to my grandfather, as a nevuah. Maybe Hashem's going to try and appear to me, but he won't be able to because I'm Tommy. Right? These are all arguments that Yosef is putting to her, trying to reason with her, trying to show her, look, this doesn't work for me. I'm not interested. I can't do this because. And he tried to reason. And he said, listen, I'm scared of my master, meaning your husband, if you don't mind me saying, says Yosef HaTzadik to her. I'm scared of him. She wasn't sympathetic. She says, Omroloi hargosei ani, I'll kill him. Don't worry about that, I'll knock him out. So he says, I'm scared of Hashem. And shockingly, but not surprisingly, she responds, meh, who's Hashem? Einenu, there's no Hashem. And Yosef stands up and says, no, God Hashem amhuna ma'id. Hashem is very great, don't diss Hashem. Right? So, this is just the arguments that she's having in words, where she's pushing and he's pushing back. But it's not just that. Yaakov Shmoni goes on to say, she started taking him around the house. Now, you can imagine he's some sort of servant, subservient to his masters. He's got to follow instructions. She's taking him around the house. She ends up in his private room, and she makes him look at the Avodah Zarah that's above her bed. And she's really trying to get him involved here. The word I came up with was she terrorized him, because it seems from the Yaakov Shmoni and Midrashim, she really did. She went to absolutely the nth degree to try and get him on board to her wicked plan. Now, just take a moment and realize the challenge that was before Yosef HaTzadik. He's 17 years old. He's stuck in a foreign country. He doesn't have any of what's called the natural support model. He's got no moral support of his family or friends. He's got nothing. He's a one stranger in a country of a strange land. He's got no anchor of support at all. And he held strong. Vayemoin, again and again and again. It's incredible to observe the might and the gvura and the courage that Yosef showed in this moment. And the Gemara tells us, we see the enormity of what Yosef had to put up with, because the Gemara in Sotah Lamed Vav tells us, Omer Rav Chana bar Bizna bar Rav Shimon Chasida, Yosef shekidei Shem Shamayim b'seiseh ha'isifu olav is achas mishmoish l'Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Yosef is called elsewhere, is written as Yehosef, has an extra letter, and the Gemara tells us he got an extra letter from the Shem of HaKadosh Baruch Hu because of the incredible gvura that he showed in overcoming his Yetzer Hara. As Rashi says, he overcame his Yetzer Hara in the most extenuating of circumstances. Now, famously, there's a machlokes in the Gemara, Rav and Shmuel, when the pasuk says that Yosef came home one day, la'aseis malachto, to do his work. Was he actually succumbing in that moment potentially to the Nisayon or not? It's a machlokes. But clearly, the Gemara in Sotah Lamed Vav tells us that when she grabbed onto his beged, says the Gemara famously, Ba'isa Shah, in that moment, Ba'asa diyuknoi shaloviv, the appearance of his father came to Yosef, v'nira salui b'chaloim, and it appeared to him in the window. And Yaakov was, so to speak, talking to his son. Amala Yosef, Asidin achecha sheikosru al avnei ephod v'ato b'neim. In the future, your brothers are going to be written on the, with their names are going to be on the ephod, worn by the Kohen Gadol. And you ought to be between them. You ought to be amongst them. Would you like your name to be erased? You'll be known as the one who pursued Znos. And it was that moment of seeing his father and that argument that Yosef saw in that moment that ensured that he still held back even after everything, and after he was really worn down, he still held back. But we have to really ask, what was it that Yosef was able to hold on to that gave him the koyach, that gave him the ability to withstand this tremendous nisayon? Where did Yosef find within himself the gvura, the courage, the ability to hold himself back and to overcome this tremendous, tremendous challenge? So Rabbi Socher Frank brings a Chasam Sofer from Parshas Vayeshev, who asks a different question. He says, look, Yosef had an advantage in this moment, that he got to see Yaakov Avinu appear to him in the window just at the moment of need. So let's assume that Yosef was, after being worn down so many times and refusing so many times, he was at a point now where it could go either way. And Yaakov appeared to him, and that stopped Yosef, as we just said. Says the Chasam Sofer, the brothers of Yosef, earlier on in the story, earlier on in the Parsha, when they committed what seems to be an Aveira, when they took their brother Yosef and they chucked him in the pit and they sold him to Mitzrayim, they didn't have Yaakov Avinu appearing to them in the window, telling them, guys, what do you think you're doing over here? Why not? How come, says the Chasam Sofer, Yosef HaTzadik was zocheh to see his father, and that provided him with the ammunition, with the final encouraging point that he needed to win him over, and yet the brothers, at their moment of need, they didn't get that siyata d'shmaya. You know what Chazon Sofer says? Unbelievable thing. He says, this question, Yosef also asked. Yosef was wondering about this very question. And he thought to himself, he knows the truth. He knows he wasn't deserving, so to speak, of being sent down to Mitzrayim in that way and treated in that way. And he asked of himself, why didn't Hashem stop my brothers in the same way that he came to my assistance? And the Chazon Sofer says, Yosef concluded it must be that this is all part of the divine plan, that I was supposed to be in Mitzrayim for a reason. And it was that recognition, it began as a question. Why did I get the Siyata D'Shmaya? They didn't. And he concluded that obviously it was by design. Hashem wanted me to be saved from this moment of Nisayon, but he didn't want the brothers to be stopped from sending me down to Mitzrayim because I was supposed to be here. In other words, the Chassid explains with that in Parshas Vayeshev when Yosef said to his brothers, so with such calmness and with such emunah and bitachon, he says to them, don't worry, it was all from Hashem, and it wasn't you who sent me down here at all. It was that recognition that Yosef had of the chain of events. It was obvious he was supposed to be where he was supposed to be. But to me, what I draw from this is what was going on in Yosef's mind as he grappled with this Yetzer Hara, as he grappled with Eshes Potiphar. What he was observing, what he was recognizing was that in the bigger picture, he was part of a plan that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had. And the plan was for him to be in Mitzrayim. Now, he may not have known it at this point as to how it was going to play out, but obviously events show us exactly how he played out to the advantage of being this viceroy in Mitzrayim that would eventually enable them to come down, etc. So it was clear he was part of the plan, and Yosef saw that clearly. He was part of a plan of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And being clear that what's happening to you now is part of the plan of HaKadosh Baruch Hu provides clarity of mission, and it provides clarity of discerning right from wrong in that moment. So there's really two things going on here. And I want to be clear about both because we're going to make references a number of times. There's two things going on here. First and simplest is, Yosef HaTzadik saw HaKadosh Baruch Hu in his situation. Yes, it was difficult. Yes, he was subject to tremendous challenge and tremendous pursuit from Eshes Potiphar. And he could have so easily just succumbed. But he saw HaKadosh Baruch Hu in his story. He saw how Hashem had by design placed him in where he was. And that provided for him the right platform, the right framework, and the right mindset from which to decide and discern right from wrong and to put himself into a place where he could stand up and not succumb. But secondly, and almost as crucially, it's very easy when a person is challenged in whatever way, in whichever challenge a person might get, it's very easy for a person momentarily to lose focus, to lose perspective, to be sucked into the difficulty of the moment. What Yosef was able to do as he was challenged by Eshes Potiphar was he was able to remain focused, to remain with a clear perspective. He was able to see meaning and purpose in that moment. It wasn't just a meaningless exercise of being difficult. There was a meaning and a purpose in that. He was there for a purpose. He was there for meaning, and he connected to that. And when a person is connected to meaning and purpose, they have the koyach, they have the power, they have the ability to rise above the Yetzer Hara of the moment. And it's not just Yosef HaTzadik. The Gemara in Yoma tells us, Lamed Hamud Beis. The Gemara tells us that after 120, a wicked person comes to Shamayim. And you know what the question is asked of him? Rosha oimrim lo mipnei ma lo yosakta b'Torah. It's a whole different conversation as to why that's the question that's posed to him. But we ask the wicked person, why didn't you learn Torah? Says the Gemara, if this person replies, well, listen here, I'm a very handsome man, Torah b'yitzri. I was very busy with my Yetzer Hara. What do you want of my life? If that's what the answer is, says the Gemara, he's got no chance, because what we're going to say to him is, Klum noya yisam Yosef, you think you're more handsome than Yosef was? And the Gemara goes on to detail all the strategies that Eshes Potiphar put in place to try and get Yosef over to her side. How she changed her clothes all the time to remain attractive. How she just drove her mad, and he said she told him he's going to throw her in jail. He's like, not a problem, Hashem will sort me out. You know, she's going to blind him, not a problem, Hashem will sort me out. He gave her money, she gave him money, he did everything she could, right, as we said before. And yet, Yosef stood stark, Says the Gemara, Nimtza, Yosef mechayeves harashoim. Yosef will hold the Rishoim accountable. A Rasha, a wicked man, will not be able to get out of accountability in Shomayim by saying, well, what should I do? I had the Yetzer Hara to deal with, because look at Yosef. This Gemara is a Pele. How on earth is the Gemara suggesting that we, well, hopefully none of us, but a Rasha, a Joe Blogs, is going to be held accountable to the same level that Yosef HaTzadik, the Heilige Yosef HaTzadik, was able to reach? That's like saying, we're going to go to Shomayim and be asked, why didn't you learn like Rav Chaim Kanievsky learned? There's not a chance in the world we're going to be asked that. We may be asked why we didn't do what we were able to do. Yes, of course, we were held accountable for what we were able to do. But you're not held accountable by someone else's great spiritual heights. That makes no sense. Why does the Gemara say that the Rasha will be challenged by why you couldn't have had it so bad because look at Yosef, he managed? It's self-evident from the Gemara that in the way we explain how Yosef grappled with and won over his Yetzer Hara, won over Eshes Potiphar, that is available to each and every one of us too, of course, on our level and in our circumstances. That crucially, fundamentally, what Yosef did, as I said, was twofold. First of all, he connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In the moment of challenge, he was able to see HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he was able to connect to Hashem. He was able to bring Hashem into his picture. And the second thing was, he was able to find purpose and meaning in the very challenge, in the very moment. He was able to see tachlis, he was able to see purpose. This isn't meaningless. This isn't to no end. There's a reason why this is happening. If we, like Yosef HaTzadik, were able to face ourselves in moment of challenge, in these two ways, in these two-pronged approach. Firstly, retain Hashem in our sights. Keep Hashem part of our life, not to just completely forget about Hashem. And secondly, to seek and to see meaning and purpose in the moment of challenge. That's our ticket through. That's the part that the Gemara is referring to, surely, that we're going to be held accountable to. If Yosef can do that, you can do it. So much so, in the Medrash Rabbah, Yudalat Vov talks of this whole story with Yosef. The Medrash brings something which might be considered generally a good piece of wisdom, but the Medrash brings it in this context. The Medrash says, you know what a chacham is? Obviously, like the Mishnah says, chacham leiv royes anoilad is someone who's able to think of the future. Or mechashev hefset mitzvah keneged schara, or schar avera keneged heseda, which means a person's able to make a calculation. Reward versus loss, what's more worthwhile? In other words, what the Medrash is talking about is that a chacham lives a life fueled by meaning and purpose. He looks in a moment of challenge and he sees to himself right from wrong, but it's not just a dry case of right from wrong. It's a case of what's the meaning here? What's the focus? And it's this pursuit of meaning and focus that enables a person to fight off the Yetzer Hara. Because we know, when does the Yetzer Hara get us the most? It's when we lose perspective, we lose focus, we completely zone out. And it happens to all of us, we're human beings, of course. It's the best antidote to the Yetzer Hara, as we see from Yosef. Firstly, Vayemoim, the idea that you just simply point blank refuse. Nothing is a good idea if it's pushed onto you, ever. So Yetzer Hara comes with this great urgency of you must, and it must be great, and there's always a reason to say, hang on, maybe I'll do that, but I'm not doing it from a place of urgency, from a place of being pushed into this. So Vayemoim, firstly, refuse. But then what you have to try and do in that moment is retain your connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Gemara tells us, say Shema, learn Torah. Do the stuff that works for you to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in that moment. And secondly, see meaning and purpose in the fight. Because if you're driven by meaning and purpose and you say, I'm going to see this through because this is the right thing to do, because it's hefsed mitzvah, because it's because of my future, because of whatever it might be, that you manage to engage with, that you connect with in a real way. But whatever it is, whatever the question is that you can ask, that's going to enable you to see meaning and purpose in the fight, that will give you the energy to fight. So Yosef was shocked by his father in the window as the final point in his journey of fight and challenge. But essentially what his father reminded him of was the reason to fight. Yosef, you've got a future ahead of you. Don't give up on this. And that sealed the deal for Yosef to step over the line. And just to finish this part by quoting the Rambam, this idea of fighting the Yetzer Hara is something that's available to us and we can draw from Yosef HaTzadik to do so. The Rambam is Seder Ter Hey Yud. The Rambam says anyone who stops himself from doing an Avera, or he does a mitzvah but not because of any pachad yira or any other reason other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kimnias Yosef HaTzadik Atzmoi Me'eshes Rabbi, like Yosef HaTzadik pushed back from the challenge presented to him by the wife of his master, from Eshes Potiphar, Hareze Mekadesh es Hashem. This is a Kiddush Hashem, which is an incredibly high form of service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That person is able to be Mekadesh Hashem. Says the Rambam, take a leaf out of Yosef Atzadik's book. Stop from doing Aveira, but do so by connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the moment. That's Parshas Vayeshev. Now I want to move over to Chanuka, and I want to show you how it's unbelievably connected. Gemara Shabbos Chaf Beis Amud Aleph famously talks through the sugya of Chanuka. And it's a very strange Gemara. Because when the Gemara first brings the halacha that a ner of Chanuka has to be less than 20 amas, like Sukkah, like Mavoi, the Gemara then moves straight into something very random. Omer Rav Kahana, Rosh Nosson. What does it mean in our Seder of the week? When they threw Yosef in the pit, the pasuk describes it as empty, the haboyrek, and then it says ein boimayim, there's no water there. The Gemara says a bit of a double expression. If there's no water, obviously it's empty, so obviously no water. Says the Gemara, mayim ein boy, there was no water. Avon choshon v'akravim yesh boy, there were snakes and scorpions. So there was no water, so it was kind of empty, but not really empty. It was empty of water, but not empty of everything. There were snakes and scorpions in there. Now, everyone, literally everyone, spends time trying to understand this Gemara because the context doesn't work. You're going from Ilchos Chanuka direct. I mean, the Gemara does do a bit of a random jump sometimes, but this is astonishing. From Chanuka right into talking about Boyrek and B'mayim. What's the significance of this? What's the connection? Now, I'm going to suggest something, Rabbi Hussein. I'll tell you straight up, it's not written anywhere in the way I'm saying it. So, any mistakes is mine, but the credit equally is not mine either, because I have taken the ideas from different places, so it's a bit of a concoction. But I still think it's the best pshat that I've seen. So by all means, challenge me, but I think it's a good pshat. If it's not pshat, it's drash. Two prongs in this. The first prong is the Medrash. Okay, the Medrash in Parshas Rabbah tells us on this boyrek, on the pasuk, the boyer is empty. Ein boimayim. It says that the Medrash Rabbah Pedal Tazayin, ein boimayim, meaning ein boy divrei Torah shenimslu l'mayim. There's no divrei Torah. Very strange. There's no divrei Torah inside the pit. What's the significance? There's no Torah here. The second point is the Gaon. The Gaon in Mishle Yud Zayin Yud Aleph. I'm not going to quote the pasuk because it's not seemingly relevant to the pasuk for what we want. But the Gaon writes on Perek Yud Zayin pasuk Yud Aleph in Mishle. He quotes his pasuk, quotes the Gemara, quotes the Medrash. Doesn't actually quote the Medrash, but saying the same thing as the Medrash. That Mai means Torah. Says the Gaon, and Nochosh, the Nochoshim, means the Yetzer Hara. We know the Yetzer Hara is born out of the Nochosh. So what we have over here is we have a boir, a pit, which has no Torah and which has the Yetzer Hara. Okay? Now one more piece of the puzzle. A lot of Mefarshim say that this pit that Yosef was thrown into must have been at least 20 amas deep. And here's the calculation. What's the reason why the Gemara says that one cannot light his menorah and for the same price put his sukkah 20 amas high? The reason is because a person has a certain line of sight. 20 amas is considered too much of a depth, too much of a height, too much of a length, too much of a measured amount for a person's eye to easily see, to easily follow. Chanuka, we have to make sure that the menorah is within the natural line of vision. Why? Because the point of seeing the menorah is parsumei nisa. What does it mean, parsumei nisa? It means remembering and recognizing Kadosh Baruch Hu's act of God in saving us in a miraculous way, and to be led to feelings of Haidah to Kadosh Baruch Hu. That's the point. So you want the menorah within one's line of vision, so that a person should be brought to that. Says the Mefarshim, Yosef's brothers clearly threw him in a pit that was more than 20 amas. Because had it been less than 20 amas, of course they would have seen the Nechoshim and Akravim inside, they would have seen the snakes, and they would never put him into a situation of danger that he could be eaten by the snakes. So it must be the pit was 20 amas deep. So they couldn't, their line of vision, it was out of their line of vision, so they couldn't see what was at the bottom, so they couldn't see the snakes. And that's how it ended up with them thinking the boyer was empty, but really there was the Nechoshim and Akravim inside. That Mefarshim really say quite clearly. But putting all this together in my mind leaves us with an amoyridik drash. if metaphorically speaking, a person sees themselves or finds themselves in a pit without the armor of Torah. Normally when we fight the Yetzer Hara, we fight it with Torah, the Gemara tells us. But if a person finds himself for whatever reason without the koyach, without the protection of Torah, what's worse, he's without the Torah, but he's with and he's facing the full might of the Yetzer Hara. You know what? The only thing you have left in your arsenal is to make sure that your pit isn't 20 amas deep. In other words, to make sure that Hashem is still within your line of sight. If within your line of vision you still have HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even if you don't have Torah to protect you, and even if you're facing the full wrath of the Yetzer Hara, you can still get through it. Because you've still got HaKadosh Baruch Hu in your line of vision. This is said in the Gemara in the context of Chanuka, because we're going to see in a second. This is the Yesod. This is the fundamental Yesod of Chanuka. Listen. The Yevonim. You know the wickedness of the Yevonim? You know what they did to us in the build-up to the Chanuka story? Do you know how much they destroyed of Yiddishkeit? They darkened our world of Yiddishkeit 100%. They put in place impossible takonos and gezeros that made us not able to keep Yiddishkeit properly. They defiled the Beis HaMikdash. They made it unable to be used for avodah. Many of the Yidden became Yevonim. We were losing right, left, and center. The Yavon is described in Medrash as choshech, as dark. They darkened our world. All seemed lost, but all was not lost. Because a handful of tzaddikim, a handful of chashmonoim, rabim biyad ma'atim, the many Yevonim fell to the hands of the few. Who were these few? A few chashmonoim. They fought a fight against Yevonim. The odds were against them, and they were energized and they were driven. By what? By how? With what koyach? They had the battle cry of Mi Lashem Melai. Who to Hashem is with me? What we're going to do, said the Chashmonoim to themselves, to their band of brothers, we're going to fight the terrible fight. We're going to push back against this terrible influence that Yovan has put upon us. For whose sake? Why? For what purpose? Mila Shem Elai. For HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They had HaKadosh Baruch Hu in their line of sight. They had HaKadosh Baruch Hu part of their world. They were living for and living because of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and they were therefore prepared to fight against the odds for the sake of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when a person is prepared to be Moisei Nefesh, when a person is prepared to put themselves out for the sake of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you know what? A person is Zoicha to Nisim. This is the essence of the Chanuka story, and therefore this is why it makes sense. The Gemara, whilst talking about this measure of 20 amas, which we've described as a measure that when you're 20 amas, you're just that little bit out of your line of sight. Says the Gemara, the Chanuka menorah can't be more than 20 amas. You want the Rebbeinu Shalom in your line of sight. You want the menorah not out of your vision, because you want HaKadosh Baruch Hu in your line of sight. Because metaphorically speaking, if a person finds himself in a pit and he doesn't even have the Torah to protect him and he's facing the Yetzer Hara, if you've got the Rebbeinu Shalom in your line of sight, you've got a chance to get through. Rabbi say, "Bayomim Mohem Bazman Hazeh." You think it's just Yovan that darkens the world? Look around you. We are living in a world today where hardly a corner in the world, in the Western world, outside of Kosle Beis HaMedrash, talk of Jewish Yiddish Torah values. We are facing an onslaught of people who think that the Western society, that progressive values are more important than good old Torah, Judeo-Christian some people might call them, but good old Torah-focused, Torah-based values. Look around the world. We know, unfortunately, how people are suffering in different ways. Individual toners. There's anti-Semitism more globally. Whatever it might be that a person might want to look to. If you want to paint a dark picture of the world today, you're welcome. There's plenty to paint. For a person to see that Bayomim Hohem Bazman Hazeh, the environment in which the Chashmonoim fought the darkness, they fought back against the Yavon, one can make the case that we're also in a type of environment today which requires that type of focus and that type of fight. But here's the encouraging point. One tiny light can dispel huge amount of darkness. It's true that such a fight takes courage, and such a fight takes one's digging deep within themselves to find the koyach and the gvura to do so. But one leads such a fight in the way the Chashmonoim did, of Mila Shem Elai, for the sake of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and living a life with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in your line of vision. This is what Yosef HaTzadik did, this is what the Chashmonaim did, and this is what is incumbent upon us to live our lives too in this way. As you sit by the Neiros of Chanuka, it can be a very touching experience. Yeah, the songs are nice, the donuts is great, but it can be a very touching experience to sit by the Neiros of Chanuka, the flickering Neiros. The Ner that's described in Sifrei Machshava as being this most spiritually physical thing. It's sort of here, but it's not here. There's something very spiritual about a Ner. Look, be touched, be warmed by the glow and the light of the Neiros, and allow yourself to be filled with hope and with tefillah. Now, just like by Yom Mohem, the Rebbeinu Shalom responded to the Mesiras Nefesh of the Chashmonaim with Nisim, Yeshua Gedolah. So too, as we sit by the Neiros of Chanuka and we recommit ourselves to also be part of that group of Mil Hashem Elai, to be part of the group who fight the fight of Torah for the sake of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, living with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in our life. And we're prepared to make this, what the Rambam describes as a Kiddush Hashem, to not turn to Avera, to turn to Mitzvah. That if we do so, we bring light to the world, and we will be Zoicha, that in our Mesiras Nefesh, our putting ourselves out for the Rebbeinu Shalom, Hashem will respond in kind with Yeshuas and Nechomis, and with Bias Gel Tzedek B'mhira V'Yameinu Amen.